Hello everyone. A warm welcome to this special interview series organized by the Indian Sociological Society. I would like to begin by extending my sincere thanks to the Indian Sociological Society and its president, Professor Maitri Chaudhary, for entrusting me with the opportunity of having this conversation. We are here today with a luminary of our discipline, a scholar whose work has not only defined critical thought in Indian sociology, but also has reached global academic shores. It is my immense pleasure to welcome Professor Sujata Patel. Professor Patel's illustrious career is a testament to her dedication to the discipline, her intellectual commitment, and academic leadership. Her foundational training at Bombay University, Dalhousie University, Canada, and Jawaharlal Nehru University paved the way for a distinguished teaching career at some of the India's most renowned institutions, including SNDT Women's University, the University of Pune, where she served as the head of the department, and the University of Hyderabad. In her post-retirement years, she continued to contribute her expertise as a national fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Simla, and as a distinguished professor at the Savitribai Phule University, Pune. Professor Patel has had a distinguished journey at several international universities, demonstrating her global academic engagement and widespread recognition of her expertise, including the prestigious Kerstin Hasselgren Visiting Professorship at Umeå University, Sweden, Humboldt Research Award from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, Germany, and an honorary doctorate from Uppsala University, Sweden. Her scholarship roles are as significant as her academic contributions. She served as the president of Indian Sociological Society and was also a member of the governing body of the Global Development Network. In addition, Professor Patel also served as a member of the governing body of the Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. Her expertise has also been sought by and shared with acclaimed academic bodies, including the ICSSR, UGC, Department for International Development, UK, etc. Her global leadership is evident from her tenure as the Vice President of our National Associations of the International Sociological Association from 2002 to 2006. Professor Patel's influence also extends to the editorial boards of prestigious journals such as Current Sociology, City and Society, and Sociological Bulletin. She was also the series editor for Oxford Studies in Contemporary Indian Society and was also a series editor for Cities and the Urban Imperative published by Routledge and Say Studies in International Sociology. Professor Patel's prolific output includes as many as 15 books and 75 research papers. ISA Handbook and Doing Sociology in India are among her notable works that have enriched our discipline. Her co-edited volumes such as Bombay, Mosaic of Modern Culture, and her seminal work on history of the discipline, The Making of Indian Sociology, have provided fresh and critical perspectives on urbanization, social movements, and the very foundation of sociology in India. Her scholarship combines Marxism, feminism, special studies, and post-structuralism. Her most recent work delves into the critical and timely topics of anti-colonial social theory. She is a voice that challenges to rethink established ideas and to consider the social sciences from a new peripheral gaze. Beyond her research, she is a passionate advocate for pedagogical reform, having written extensively on the challenges within university structures and even coordinating the e-Patasala, and outline postgraduate resource. She also delivered several distinguished memorial lectures that honor and extend the legacies of prominent scholars in the field. To put it precisely, Professor Patel's scholarship is both expansive and deeply perceptive. Madam, We are deeply honored by your presence. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for Professor Mohanty for arranging this conversation. And I would like to thank the Indian Sociological Society for organizing this. I think it's going to, the many conversations that are going to be uploaded are going to be very beneficial to this next generation and the students that come after us.
Thank you. So let me begin with my first question. Madam, you chose to study sociology at a time when it was not as popular as discipline as economics, history, and political science. So, what really motivated you to pursue sociology?
Yeah. I can answer this question in two ways. There is a simple answer to this question. I was not really sure of what I wanted to do. And after I passed my school examination, I realized I cannot do science. So I went into humanities. And during the time when I was doing humanities, we had a 4-year undergraduate course. And the first 2 years were general papers, which included sociology, political science, economics, logic, philosophy. So I just was one of the students who did humanities. And again, my inter marks were not good enough, so that I though I wanted to do philosophy, I was taken into sociology. So there is a very simple explanation to this question, and that is it was just a set of circumstances. But I think there is a larger, uh, more complex answer to this. And I think the more complex answer deals with if I did sociology for 2 years in undergraduate level, why did I continue with it? Because after I did my undergraduation, I did my master's in sociology. And then I went abroad and did another master's in sociology. So, and now I'm professionally associated with the discipline. So the question is, how did I feel identified with sociology? And I think the answer lies in my childhood socialization. I was born in a family which were involved in the national movement. My mother was in jail for during the 1942 movement, and my father was associated with Nai Talim and basic education. They were both Gandhians, and they believed in national reconstruction and education as a means to do that. So at one level, I grew up with the idea that education was very important, and it is a value that is necessary for nationalist reconstruction. Secondly, I grew up as a very curious child and a young adult. I wanted to know about many ways that people lived, because I knew our family was different. And I started understanding the patterns of social behavior in neighbors, in friends, in families. And I started thinking about differences and similarities of the way people lived. Together with this curiosity was a travel bug, because since childhood, I was always going with my parents to various parts of the country and they took me through these yatras across the country just to make me aware what was the country about. And therefore, it gave me an idea of what the social life of the people was about. And lastly, we were a family which was very modern in a way that many of my neighbors were not. There was no affiliation to religion. There was no affiliation to rituals. There was only an understanding that we have, as a child, from childhood, I had only one precept that I was taught, that I have to be independent, autonomous, and think for myself and work towards how to grow to become a youth and an adult and define my own personality. So the household worked on a democratic principle as well as a modern principle. And I think these values are what sociology is all about also. So I do not see, therefore, any reason for me not to have gone towards sociology, because sociology represented these values of understanding differences and similarities, of trying to see the world in all that complexity, and of having a methodology to comprehend these differences and similarities, to be able to understand how humanity is organized.
Okay, all of us, we know sociology department at Bombay University had diverse ideological bearings. And which teacher or teachers do you think had a profound influence on your thinking? And how did you think that your training at Bombay University help you to gain insights for your research in sociology?
I would like to say that my affiliation to sociology was both in terms of learning the discipline, but also of my own understanding of the discipline. So it had both an informal journey and a formal journey. And in terms of the formal journey in Bombay University, there were 3 scholars and teachers who were very important to framing my perspective. The first was Dr. Manorama Savood. And she was a Marxist, and she introduced me how to do research. So my affiliation to sociology was more as a researcher than, and it's only later in my life when I joined SNDT University, I became a teacher. And from the time that I joined the master's program, I got involved with Dr. Sabood's research work. And one of the projects that emerged from there was an understanding of what impact that the new development programs were impacting the tribal groups in Danu Taluka in Maharashtra. So I really, 2 things happened. I understood how to do research, but I got into this whole question of agrarian development and programs for agrarian development and planned programs for agrarian development. And this I did for a whole year while I was learning masters. But the second project which was going on, but I was not associated with, but I knew what was happening, was Professor A.R. Desai's major project, which has led to about 11 or 15 volumes today, on documenting the working class history of India. And that project was going on, and he had got involved in this project. People from IIT Bombay, people from TIFR Bombay, people from various walks of life. And it was very interesting. When I was doing this master's program, I think it was the railway strike was on. And that led to 75, 77, emergency. So Bombay was in the throes of new social change and new demands and new agendas. And Professor Desai's project was trying to capture this through his documentation. And so many people got associated with it. So I came to know so much about the working class because I saw the work being made at that time. And the third professor, which influenced me, and was Professor Dhiren Narayan. Professor Narayan was actually a PhD from Columbia, and he was Robert Merton's student.
Yes,
And
yes.
Robert Merton, as you know, was a sociologist of science, but Dr. Narayan was teaching sociology of knowledge. I think this was the first time that any department was teaching sociology of knowledge. And there were just two people in the class, and he gave us full attention, and he was completely um, uh, committed to the idea of sociology of knowledge because his own work was in that area. So during these 2 years, these are the three key individuals who influenced me. But I would like to suggest that there were other mentors that I had, which which influenced me during my second master's and then my PhD. And these were not necessarily those who were my supervisors, etc., but they were others with whom I had connections. Because, as I said, I was very curious to know what, how to understand what I was doing. And I was a very curious person. So I connected up with so many people. And consequently, this helped me to grow.
Up to 1970s, in India, actually British anthropological tradition and American structural functional perspective dominated anthroposociological research, where historical analysis was almost sidelined. What exactly prompted you to pursue research on historical sociology?
So this brings me back to your first question and my answer to your first question. As I informed you that I was since childhood we were always traveling and trying to find and understand what was the country. So an historical approach was always there in the way I comprehended the country. Both my parents were very highly educated. My father finished from Columbia University, a master's in education. It was highly influenced by Dewey. So Dewey's books were there in the house, and we would read these together. I remember reading them, even though not understanding them in a very young childhood. But I continue to reflect on what Dewey has said, both about education and about democracy. So these kind of questions were always there in the discussions within the house. And the family and the friends which were engaged with these discussions were also around there. So this was a house which had an intellectual orientation and was involved in in trying to understand India as well as its history. So when I did my undergraduation in sociology, uh, we had 6 papers in sociology and 2 papers in history. So from the beginning, both sociology and history was important. And I did a PhD in history, not in sociology. So I was at the Center for Historical Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University.
Right. After completing your doctorate, you also worked as a research scholar in Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. Would you like to talk about this experience and also how collecting and interpreting archival data, especially from the colonial period became the part of your repertoire?
Yeah. Well, it had a lot to do with my PhD in Center for Historical Studies at JNU. And because I did a PhD in that, in early modern history, and one of the examiners was Dr. Ravindra Kumar, who was the director of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. And they had just started the fellowship. So he said that, why don't you come why don't you apply, and we'll see whether you get selected. If you do, you can be a fellow just after your PhD. So that's how I became a fellow, but I didn't learn history because I became a fellow at NMML. I learned how to do archival research when I was at the Center for Historical Studies. JNU Center for Historical Studies had a sociologist, Satish Sabharwal. And I was affiliated to, as he was given the supervision for me. And and we had two more historians, one a political historian, Bipin Chandra, and one an economic historian, Sabyasachi Bhattacharya. So one of the requirements that I had was to learn how to do archival research. And they instructed me, and I got instructed through many of my colleagues who were doing MPhil and PhD. I was a direct PhD student because I had already done a second master's in Canada. So I was a direct PhD student, and I learned how to do the archival material, sit in the archives, and learn how to do that through through the way, or through the example of the teachers who were there supervising me. So I had three supervisors. But I also learned it because I was sitting in the Bombay archives. And in Bombay archives, there were many people sitting there who became excellent historians. Raj Chandawakar, who worked on working class in Bombay. There was Lakshmi Subramaniam, who worked on 18th century Surat. So I had I had examples from others who were historians, who had trained as historians, and who showed me how to do this work and how to get files and how to interpret, etc. But beyond that, I think my PhD was important because I was also required to understand the debates in economic history. And I was asked to do courses with the Economic Center, the Center for Economic Studies and Planning in JNU. And there were Utsa Patnaik was taking a course on the mode of production debate in India. And I was asked to take that course. And then Prabhat Patnaik was taking a course on imperialism. I was asked to take that course. Also, I was asked to take a course on political theory by the CHS. And this was being taken by Sudipta Kaviraj. So what happened consequently was that I learned how to do economic theory. I learned how to do what is political theory. And I not only learned it, but I engaged with it and understood the nature of state, the nature of power, the nature of domination. Those days, Althusser was important, Gramsci was important, and the mode of production debate was very important in the early 70s, as you know. This is to do with the mode of production in agriculture. So I got an overall understanding of the debates in these three disciplines. And I also got an overall understanding of what are the themes, what are the methodologies to use, and what are the themes to study. So from the beginning, I was interested in trying to understand what is the transition and transformation taking place in India. And I went to JNU to understand it. But what JNU gave me through all this learning was that I understood that we have to assess what we know about India through the concept of colonial modernity. So India was not modern as yes. Sociologists were suggesting. Sociologists of non-structural functionalist anthropological mold were suggesting. But India was colonially defined in terms of its modernity, and that you cannot separate the two. Now, this is not the language that sociologists were discussing. Not the language that sociologists were discussing, even in the sociology department or the CSS in JNU, but mainly in Delhi University, where M.N. Srinivas had set up with M.S.A. Rao, with Andribeti, with various other colleagues, a way to think about sociology in India. So my understanding of sociology came out of a critical Marxist perspective, which I learned in the master's program in Bombay, and of which I learned also when I was at Dalhousie University, Canada, because I was my supervisor there was the Marxist theorist Tom Bottomore. And then going to JNU, it helped to solidify this perspective. Right. And it led me to understand what I need to do further. And I want to add here that the 6-7 years that I was in JNU was very important because I was continuing doing research at that time. So if I started doing research in the master's program in Bombay, then I continued to do it in the PhD after I joined JNU. I again in agriculture, because that time I got to know Professor Jan Breman, who was heading the Indo-Dutch program, yes, which was a comparative program, which was institutionalized through ICSSR. And Jan Breman asked me to get associated with a particular program of cooperatives. So I did work on 19th century growth of nationalist movement in Kheda district and how it impacted the growth of Amul cooperative. So I continued to do research, and then I got a project from IDRC. And they asked me to look at the Balyapal cooperative, Balyapal pan economy, and how that has impacted the anti-missile project over in Balasore district. So here I was doing work on capital class relationship in Ahmedabad textile industry for my PhD. And that was during the interwar period. And here I was doing simultaneously other 2 or 3 projects like this. So I understood myself through all these research studies as doing work on the transition and transformation in India towards colonial modernity and colonial capitalism.
As I know, most of your early writings was on India's experiment with capitalist modernity. Could you please tell us how India's experience was distinct from that of the West and countries in Africa and Latin America? I know it requires a very elaborate answer, but tell us very as precisely as possible the major points.
Yeah. Uh, so I want to first put a caveat. Um, I started learning of what was happening in Africa and Latin America and Southeast Asia much later. I knew about what was happening in India much earlier. And my knowledge on this matter has grown as I've grown older. However, my uh, concern and was and will has always remained on whether industrialization and urbanization, what impact has industrialization and urbanization has had on changing agrarian relations, and may allowing for or promoting a working class through a bourgeois intervention. That has been my question for India, and it has always been my question for the rest of the world. Why was this so? Because this is the way the transition debate was thought of in Europe, that it was a bourgeois capitalist intervention. And this bourgeois capitalist intervention displaced the working class, displaced the peasantry, and through encroachments. And these peasantry then became the working class. So industrialization led to urbanization and ultimately led to modernity. That was the model that we were given. It became very apparent to me when I was doing my doctorate that this was not so. Uh, what we had was urbanization without industrialization.
Mm-hmm.
And wherever there was a industrialization, as it had happened in the textile industry in Ahmedabad, where I was doing my research, it had happened in Bombay, where again there was a textile industry, or in Coimbatore, where there was a textile industry, or in Delhi, there was a textile industry, or the jute industry in Calcutta. The working class was never incorporated and became a working class which was unionized and could become what later sociologists called bourgeois and bourgeoisie. That means they became upper middle classes. They could not do so. And it became very clear to me that this was not possible. And this was not possible because of the colonial heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And I started thinking about what can be um, the way to move forward in terms of research terms. And to me, it appeared that um, there was never a possibility of India to get and transit towards industrialization. Even today, we don't have manufacturing, uh, complete manufacturing. All we have is um, the growth of the non-formal, informal, unorganized sector. And we have various levels of strata in that. And that strata is in a survival mode because of the fact that there is very little investment in organized industry, and there is always small scale and self-employed work that has been continuously organized within India. So from colonial times, this was the pattern where labor was exploited and the surplus value was extracted. And wherever the peasantry got displaced through consolidation of land holdings, they became part of the um, continuous migrants that went into the cities, remained there for some time, and came back. And that circulatory migrants are now has always remained a way in which the urban and the rural gets connected, and the rural and the urban workers live at very low level of survival rates because they haven't been able to become mobile to get access to better lifestyles and better incomes. And I became aware when I was doing PhD. So a large part of my work afterwards has been in understanding urbanization. And I think this is the parallel which you can find even in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America. The fact that this transition could not take place. And this could not take place because of the larger world system where trade has always led to higher profits for the core countries rather than the semi-periphery and the periphery. I know it's a large, there are many
Yeah,
other questions that you might want to ask, but I think um, we can keep it to this much. Otherwise, we'll only spend time on this.
okay, okay. Some of your writings are quite notable on history of sociology in India. And in your writings, you have argued that Eurocentrism and its colonial or nationalist orientations have implicated the sociological knowledge, and attempts are made by Marxist, feminist, and anti-caste critics to challenge these traditions. In your assessment, what is the Indianness in Indian sociology? And as you know, actually, there was a growing concern in India for several decades to indigenize sociology. So could you please share your views on this?
So, like the last question, this is also a big question.
Yeah,
And I'm all I can say right now is I'm putting together a book on this. But very, very briefly, I want to start with what um, in early 1970s, Srinivas and Panini, who wrote on the growth of Indian sociology,
sociology. Yeah.
and and Mukherjee, Ramakrishna Mukherjee, who also wrote on the growth of
Yes.
Indian sociology, they said that the professionalization of the discipline took place after independence. I would like to suggest, and therefore they said after that they said what sociology did was to then indigenize.
Mm.
Looked at Western categories and they gave theoretical, methodological, and institutional um, reorganization of these Western categories, and they made it Indian. So that is how they called it the Indianization of Indian sociology. I have two or three points of view on this, which I'll just say very briefly.
Please.
First, I would like to say that uh, Indian academic, whatever we teach and learn today as sociology, is something which hasn't started only after independence, but it started much earlier. It was not part of an academic courses and academic milieu, but it was there as an academic program, which was there from mid 18th century onwards, when the British established control over India's territory and put together a way to understand Indian sociological. They did it through the interlocutors from India and through the Orientalists and the Indologists, who put together ways to think of India through, and they used the Sanskrit texts to understand what India was. So it was a very, so one part of my argument is that it was a very Hinduized, um, upper caste, male perspective of what um, India was. And that was reframed with, um, with Courier And we can see this in an elaborate, sophisticated version in Louis Dumas' Homo Hierarchicus. And we can also see it in some work and scholarship of the Lucknow school, particularly D.P. Mukherjee. And we see a little bit of this also in M.N. Srinivas's scholarship and the work of various colleagues in the Department of Sociology in Delhi University. What they defined as sociology were three subsystems or institutions: family and kinship, particularly kinship. Family was more of a discussion by Gurye and by Kapadia in Bombay University. Caste, and you know how much Srinivas has written on caste. And thirdly, on Hindu religious system. These were the three key arenas of Indian sociology. And my argument is that these three continued with the colonial British tradition because they let the past categories define the present context. And the present context was of colonial capitalist modernity. So we needed categories and concepts and theories and perspectives that were of the moment, of today's moment, or of early 20th century or of mid 20th century, to understand the social relationships and substructures that were being organized as a consequence of colonialism, that is extraction of wealth, of natural resources, of labor, of control over labor, and of extracting its surplus. And instead of that, a large part of sociology in the post-independence period was only oriented towards understanding unhistorically these three subsystems, and also was involved in using a ethnographic methodology to do a particularistic case-based understanding of the whole country. So we have a particularist methodology under assessing a country based on a single case. You know, excellent example is Rampura. Rampura was one village, and one could generalize on the basis of one village the entire country, which had so much differences and diversities. And the question that was asked by early 80s, and if you look at the work, it's very clear. Dhanagre first questions it in 1981. Professor Uman questions it in 1983. Sabarwal questions it in 82 or 81. How do you understand the macro and the meso and the micro together? You can't leave out the macro and leave out the meso. So basically, they were asking a question: how do you integrate economics, politics, and sociology together to be able to understand the change, social change that is taking place in it? And I think that history is very important for today's generation, because we still continue with the same language. And doing this history will allow one to go beyond and go forward towards critical ways of thinking. And I think that criticality is there, was there in India, but it got lost within sociology. It was there in economics. It was there in some parts of political science, but it got lost somewhere in sociology, and we need to go back to it. That's why I discussed the methodologies that critically assess and examine these dominant perspectives that came from colonialism. And I call it anti-colonial social theory.
Related to this question, I have another question. Sociology has existed in India for over a century now. And although we have generated a rich corpus of knowledge, our focus was more on understanding the realities, and the theorization part we have left to the West. Despite India's long and unique history and rich diversity, we have not contributed substantially to major theoretical discourses at the global level. What do you think about this?
Again, a very large question, Professor Monty.
Right.
I would like to briefly answer this by saying that, I want to go back to what I said, Srinivas said, and Mukherjee said, and I think there is a culture that has emerged in the post-independence period that this culture is related to anti-colonial nationalism that emerged in early 20th century. This anti-colonial nationalism was against colonialism. So they questioned colonial ways of understanding, knowing and thinking about India. And they gave the answer that nationalism can solve the problem. So once India became independent, what we established was nationalist social science. And this was not only true for India, it was true for many African countries which became independent after the Second World War. And the last one being South Africa, which became independent in the early 90s. And I would suggest that what got institutionalized consequent to this idea that nationalism would solve all the problems was a class question. It was also a caste question, and it was also a patriarchal question. So a certain class was given agency to reorganize the nation state and country. That is, the capitalist class was given that agency, mainly made up of upper castes and mainly males. And it's only in the late 80s that this nationalism has been questioned by social movements that emerged in late 70s after the emergency, which where whether it is the women's movement and the question of raised by feminists, or whether it's the tribal movements and the question of land, and it's the Dalit movement and the question of exclusion and social justice. It all raised the queries against the nationalism that got institutionalized in post-independence period. And consequently, it is the challenge that these movements gave to social sciences that led to the interrogation of nationalist social science. And we see it in the subaltern school, where the subaltern school has questioned the nationalist Indian project. You remember Ranjit Guha starts his preface in volume 1 about both questioning Marxist elite and bourgeois elite historiography. So this is something that sociologists have not embraced completely. And I would suggest that the first intervention by a sociologist against questioning this nationalism has been made particularly in the second volume of A.R. Desai, Recent Trends in Indian Nationalism. And he suggested that our planning and development programs are class-based programs. That is, they are programs that will enhance capitalist development rather than democratize this capitalist development. And since then, we've had a Dalit critique of the nationalism, because ultimately nationalism is asking a question: who are our nations? Is it the elite who are the nations? And can they hegemonize and dominate the rest of the nations? Or there are many other nations? And unless, as sociologists, because nation is not only about nationalism, but it is about communities, understanding communities. Unless we as sociologists intervene in that, I do not think we can go forward on this matter. So I think we have to embrace the critique of nationalism, also for a second reason. And if I have few minutes, I'll just elaborate this.
Yeah, please.
The political scientist Bhikkhu Parekh has suggested that Indian nationalism has three intellectual trends. The first trend is of modern nationalism, where particularly in economics, they took the categories and concepts that were there in use in Europe. So supply, demand. They used methodologies of mathematics and statistics, and they went on to understand ways in which to reframe this the reframe market economics to help nation states instead of colonial um, colonial um, colonials or the British colonial state. However, and this was also true for political science, because the category of state and democracy are modern categories. Of power, they are modern categories. But Bhikkhu Parekh says there were two other strands of nationalism in India. One was what he called traditional nationalism, which believed that you have to go to the past to understand the present. So you have to go to the literate Sanskrit texts to understand the present, and you can see in Indology that's what Gurye did. Or in fact, you can see its most well worked out theory in Dupont's Louis Dumont's Homo Hierarchus, where he used Hindu religious texts to understand the way hierarchies were constituted in India, and thereby represented Brahminism instead of non-Brahminic positions. The middle, the second category was traditional modern, which brought in both modernity and tradition, and this was which suggested that there were syncretic traditions in India which can give solution to understand social change. I think we are in a crossroads today, because we see a revival of the first and the second ways of thinking today, rather than the secular modern forms of understanding. Because the secular modern forms of understanding, that is, the concepts and categories and theories and perspectives, give us a critical entry into understanding contemporary and current India. And unless we go into that, sociology won't be able to go forward. And that's why I've called it, we are at crossroads at this moment.
You are one of the few sociologists who has broadened the horizon of Indian sociology by shifting focus to many new areas like urban studies, political sociology, and social theory. According to you, which contemporary issues in India need to be prioritized for sociological research?
I want to answer this question in two ways. The first thing is, I think I have never tried to restrict myself from learning new things. As I told you, I'm a very curious person. Also, since the time I did my master's in Bombay University, I've been doing research in many areas. Started with, plan development. I've done some research also in the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. I have done, as you know, work in Odisha and in Kheda district, Gujarat, on social change in 19th and 20th century. So
Right.
all these different areas that I started assessing and examining, which includes also cities and urbanization. It's about trying to understand different parts of social change that emerges. As you know, one way of looking at from a Marxist perspective is uneven development. So we do not have the same processes repeating and repeating and repeating itself. Even though the macro may be the same, the way the articulation of the micro emerges happens in a distinct way through the engagement between structure and change, structure and agency. So
Yes.
it is in this context that while I try to understand through my research agrarian change, I also try to understand urban and industrial change. And an understanding of this allowed me to fill up the paths regarding the bigger question, which is the transition and transformation that is taking place in India. So it is at one level the question that is mode of production debate. At another level, it's a question of transition and transformation taking place. And I cannot see how any of these specializations can become the leitmotif for one, a leitmotif to understand anything about India, because unless we know all the parts, we can't understand the transition and transformation processes. So my major project was, since the time I started doing research in sociology from 1975 onwards, when I was in 75 onwards, when I was in doing masters, it was to understand capitalist modernity. And I don't think I moved away from it at all. I go on thinking about how various arenas can help us to understand the complexity of capitalist modernity in India. And I go on, continue to assess and examine that. Having said that, I'm also suggesting that an entry point to understand capitalist modernity is urbanization and the whole urbanization process. Because by the 1990s and further now, in the last 2 decades, we can't start with agrarian change any longer. We are starting now with urban change. We need to start with urban change. So we can't understand any longer what is happening in agriculture without understanding what is happening in its integration with urbanization. And this urbanization is about capitalist colonial modernity. So that is entering and organizing social relationships. And I think we have to have this as a starting point. And I know maybe you will disagree with me because you are a specialist in agriculture and agricultural transition. So at some point we'll have a debate on this.
No, I agree with you. Broadly, I agree with you. But, anyway, so I have another question.
Yeah.
As all of us know, most of our well-known sociologists in India, they are identified with a particular area or theme. Like M.N. Srinivas with caste and social mobility, A.M. Saha with family studies, Iravati Karve with kinship, Andre Vette with social inequalities, D.N. Dhanagari with peasant movements, P.K. Women with citizenship and nationality, etc.
Yeah.
As your research spans a wide range of areas like urban studies, historical sociology, modernity and social theory, what would you like to be most identified with?
It's, as I said in my last answer, my work is really to do with colonial capitalist modernity. However, in terms of what I have written, I have certain few papers that I think are some of my best. So I can tell you what these papers are, but not the specialization. Can I tell you what the papers are?
Yeah, please tell.
Yeah. So one of the paper is what I wrote in 1988 when Alice Thorner and no, this was written in 1988 and published in Economic and Political Weekly in 1988. And it was a paper on Gandhi. And it was titled The Construction and Reconstruction of Women in Gandhi. And in 2 years back, I think in 2023 or 22, I did a new version of this paper, again published in EPW, rethinking on the earlier paper. And I think it is one of the papers which gave my scholarship way to move forward, because it's a assessment, analysis, and a deconstruction of Gandhi's ideas on women. And when it discusses this in the context of my own work earlier on the working class in Ahmedabad textile industry, a union which Gandhi organized. And this paper came out in consequent of a question I asked myself as to why women in textile industry were the first people to get displaced. What was it related? How was it related to the family ideology that Gandhian unionism promoted, and which was also part of an ideology of the British colonial state, as well as of the capitalist class and the business groups that were managing the textile industry. And this family ideology was a global ideology present at that time because, we had manufacturing across the world. And it led me to ask what was, and made a critical assessment of Gandhi, because at that time, feminists in India were eulogizing Gandhi for the way in which Gandhi was able to get women to get involved in the nationalist movement. And I think I was able to put together an argument about how an individual leader can be revolutionary in one level and can be conservative and orthodox on other themes. And I was able to suggest that while Gandhi was able to confront colonialism, he was not able to confront patriarchy and misogyny. And how to keep a class collaborative coalition in place. He put together this kind of an ideology, which ultimately we are facing and we continue to face, because it reinstitutionalized patriarchy in new ways. So that was one paper. The second paper, which I think was published in 2006 in Current Sociology, was on the history of Indian sociology. It's called Beyond Binaries, Towards a Reflective Social Science. And it deals with the new work that I was doing since early 2000 about how is power and knowledge connected to each other. And this paper, Beyond Binaries, looks at the history of sociology in India to suggest that we need to move forward and assess and examine the ways in which colonial categories and concepts continue to reflect in sociological thought. I've used the concept of methodological nationalism here. And I've suggested, as I've explained earlier, that nationalism can be conservative and orthodox, but also emancipatory and liberatory. And in case of sociology, the scholarship and the intellectuals drew from the conservative and orthodox path rather than emancipatory. And it is very important to have a nationalist sociology which can be emancipatory and libertarian. So that's the second paper. And the third paper, which is recently published, is on anti-colonial social theory, which we'll talk about later. Yeah.
You are one of the few women sociologists to hold many key positions, including the post of Vice President of International Sociological Association. So what challenges did you encounter as a women sociologist coming from the global south?
This is a very difficult question to answer, because there is a lot of experiences that I can mention and talk about and discuss. But I think, as we know, all organizations where there is not enough equal representation of genders and not enough representation of geographies, there will be biases. As we know, so as sociologists, we know that this is a standard practice that organizations have. And it is rare to find ways in which this can be overturned. So sometimes if there is gender balance, then there is geographical imbalance. And sometimes when there is geographical balance, then there could be gender imbalances. So in both in the International Sociological Association, when I entered into the Indian International Sociological Association, I entered at a time when there were, in the executive committee, very strongly solid group of feminists who were trying to redress the balance of gender in the organization. And I was the only person from the Global South in that executive committee. This was in 1998. And I was elected in the executive committee in 1998. So I got I found it difficult to be able to find a voice, because as a person from Global South, I was told many things rather than asked what my opinion is.
Okay.
And I had to use the help of the group of women who were there in the executive to be able to ensure that I had a voice. And uh, I think I was successful sometimes and not successful sometimes, but I won't be able to give you examples at this moment.
Yeah. Okay.
But the same thing happened in Indian Sociological Society. I was the first woman president, as you know. And in 1951, the ISS was established, and I became president, I think, in 2017, January.
Yes.
So we are talking of, 60 more than 60 years. And and the same thing happened in the Indian Sociological Society. And I think it is very difficult because the practices and practices are such that it aids those who are used to certain ways of functioning, and 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 it is very difficult to establish one's legitimacy. But I don't want to say more, because I think what has happened since I left is that we've had 3 more women presidents, and I think we
Yeah.
have been
Now we
able
have
to
more.
move forward on this.
Yeah. Uh, I know during your presidency of Indian Sociological Society, you have brought many notable changes. Based on your experience, could you please tell us what needs to be done further to strengthen the society?
Prajamonti, I don't think as ex-president, I should say anything about what is the present and the future, and I haven't kept in touch. So I don't know what is the situation today. And I don't think I should comment on it right now. I think the new leadership can handle this very well. But going back to when I was the president, and thank you for saying that I brought about many changes. Yes, I did, because I realized that there was very little that was done at that before I became the president. That was uh, that would be good for the society and its members. So, as you know, a sociological bulletin and the Hindi journal um, started getting published by Sage. It got recognized globally, therefore. Financially, it helped the society because today we have a lot more money that is there for the society. Um, uh, a new website, online online elections. There were many changes brought, and particularly uh, the move from the Indian Social Institute to the office of the society in its own apartment was very important. But I think the later presidents have brought in further changes. And I think the challenge today is we have a very new group of young scholars who are interested in the profession. However, they are interacting at a time when university education, university institutions are under challenges, and they are being threatened in the present political situation. So I think the challenge would be to move to confront this and to make an agenda of how to support the discipline and the scholars so that the discipline flourishes and the scholars flourish. Because right now there is a huge problem of recruitment, of departments not being able to go to have full membership. They do not have. There are many ways where the present regime has intervened to change the ways of functioning. So I think the challenge is to.
Okay, I think let's move to the next question.
Yeah.
Though Indian Sociological Society is, growing by number year by year, there is a visible divide between the mainstream sociology and sociology practice in most areas.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. What did you say?
No, the Indian Sociological Society is growing by number year by year. And
Yeah.
but there is a kind of visible divide between the mainstream sociology and sociology practiced in the mopsal areas.
Yeah.
And we have regional associations. However, the regional associations, excepting a few, they are not meeting the professional aspirations of sociologists of the concerned regions. So, as a past president of Indian Sociological Society, what are your suggestions to bridge the gap between the mainstream sociology and the vernacular sociology?
If I understand you correctly, I think there are two parallel sociologies being taught and learned. One is in the English language and one is in the regional language. And they have different cultures. They teach different things. They have different sources. They have different teaching books and articles. So it is related to the fact that regional language, has not developed completely all the intellectual resources that can help to build the sociology in a vernacular mold. We are facing that problem, even though everyone has been um, cognizant of it for a long time. We haven't developed that language, regional language. And because of that, it is very difficult for those who are working within regions and regional languages and in Mofussil to build a scholarship of criticality. It's very difficult. And I would say that even among English teaching universities and departments, we find a lot of them doing the same thing. A large number of teachers maybe just furnishing the PPTs which they have prepared 10 years back. So it's not necessarily only a problem of regional language. There is a divide between a very few elite universities and a large number of Mofussil and even metro universities which do not communicate the knowledge that is there today within the Indian sociological corpus. And I think there is no immediate solution that we can have except to encourage translation of English language texts in the regional languages. There is a lot of effort that needs to be put in because many people are not bilingual. The earlier generation, I remember Professor Dhanagre could take lectures both in Marathi and English.
Yes.
I can't take that. Even though a lot of my papers are published in Marathi, I can't take that, So I think we need to develop the regional language resources so that they can present a way to understand and communicate this to those who don't know English. As you know, a very small group of our 1.4 billion know English. So we have to see how we can engage with the regional languages and develop that resources.
They constitute the largest constituencies of sociology. And don't
Yeah.
you think that this is a responsibility of the mainstream sociology to reach out them?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think we all have to think of how to connect up with this group. I don't know if you know, but uh, a large part of my articles on social theory have been already translated, and they're going to my ex-students from Pune University are bringing it out in Marathi. And some people are trying to put together in Bengali also. So I think these kind of initiatives need to be done more and more.
Okay, you had the opportunity to serve as a professor at the Department of Sociology at Pune University for over a decade, and you are also the head of the department there.
Mm.
And Pune University was a leading center of research and training in sociology for quite long time.
Yeah.
So please share your experience as an institutional builder.
Uh, before I joined Pune University, I was at the SNDT Women's University.
Yes.
And SNDT Women's University was a 3-language university, Marathi, Gujarati, and English. And in Pune University, they had bilingual teaching and learning. And so one of the important challenges I faced was how to communicate to those who don't know English.
Yes.
And we started tutorial classes. And one of my students, um, I used to take social theory classes. And one of my students got up and said, I know you are saying something very important, but I can't understand. And he said that in Marathi because I know Marathi, I can understand Marathi, but I cannot give lectures in it. So we decided that there would be an interlocutor who will record all my lectures, who will then get it retranslated and then have tutorial classes in Marathi for a large number of the Marathi speaking students. And it worked very well. It worked so well that when I left Pune University, I got 9 CDs from the organizer of these tutorial classes who told me that these are the Marathi versions of your lectures. To get your lectures in 9 CDs is a great achievement. So I felt very happy to do that. The second thing, which was a challenge, was trying to convert um, mainstream oriented learning practice into credit system. And because um, University Pune got the I status, um, I was made in charge to look at how to build a credit system and a school and center system for a 2-year 64 credit program and how to change the examination system consequently. And I thought that this intervention was very important for me. I learned how to take leadership roles in issues regarding pedagogy and um, uh, institution building, higher education institution building. And the third thing that I thought was a big challenge and helped me was reframing curriculum uh, to think to present to the students the way I think we have to do sociology. And that is, for me, sociology is social science. And therefore the curriculum has to um, put in courses which were on economic sociology, on political sociology, on cultural sociology, and that and relate that to issues of inequalities, exclusions, and 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 also simultaneously injustices. It was a big challenge for me to persuade my colleagues and everyone else, experts, to reframe curriculum in this way. And I think I was able to persuade them. So I was able to do that in a little way in SNDT Women's University, but mainly in Pune University, because Pune University had a system of centralized intervention at department level, and therefore we could do it and create a collective agenda. And because I was also an expert in board of studies in various other departments in various other universities, I could export these ideas to these departments and universities, and I felt very fulfilled. And ultimately, these got institutionalized in the e-Pachala project, which you mentioned in your introduction.
Which were the major courses you taught, and which one did you like the most?
I generally taught always social theory. I always taught contemporary social theory. I did that in SNDT Women's University. I did it in University of Pune, and I did it in University of Hyderabad. I also taught sometimes classical social theory, and in other times, I also taught sociology of Indian society. So in Hyderabad University, I also taught political sociology. And in the latter part of my stay in Hyderabad University, I taught um, MPhil PhD uh, course on theory. So I stopped teaching at MA level and taught mainly at the PhD level, MPhil PhD level. But now there's no MPhil, so yeah.
And recently, you have shifted your focus to anti-colonial social theory. You have started writing many pieces. So, do you think that this theory contributes to the reframing of global social theory? How will you how will this theory be helpful for understanding the sociological issues in contemporary India?
So anti-colonial social theory is global theory for me. Yeah. And it is a project which is countering the universalization of European social theory as a way to understand global social theory. As you know, classical sociological theory and contemporary social theory are two courses that gives to students ways to think about social theory in sociology, which talk about the European experience of transition and transformation, and their present concerns regarding the dystopias of modernity. Therefore, there are theories on risk, on environmental crisis, etc., etc. And we have imported these and made it part of our courses and our curriculum. So we are in a situation today when we appropriate it without a critical look at it. And I have been very concerned with this kind of an approach to understanding social theory. So when I talk about anti-colonial social theory, I distinguish between two levels of it. One is social theory, one is sociological theory. I think generally sociological theory is a theory about modernity, about capitalist development, of capitalist transition, capitalist transformation, depending on which perspective we use, liberal or Marxist. But social theory is about meta theory, that is, assumptions regarding how to study the sociological. And sociological theory of 19th century and 20th century and 21st century have taken the assumptions of European ways of thinking to study the global. And by talking about anti-colonial social theory, I'm suggesting that we need assumptions which are global, which are not necessarily European. And I use the term anti-colonial because I want to extract these assumptions from the way in which social movements in early 20th century in Africa and Asia and Southeast Asia and Latin America presented the problem, and suggesting that we are not only talking of capitalism, but we are talking of colonialism also. So we cannot not engage with colonial capitalism and its modernity. And that is the ontological framework we need to have to be able to present a global social theory, which is alternate to the ones that Europeans constituted and continue to constitute, because they are the economically, politically, and intellectually the dominant group. And their experience is exported as a dominant experience. And what we need to do is to understand the subjugated and subaltern experience, which we can't do if we accept the exported dominant ways of thinking. So anti-colonial social theory is about meta theory. It's about understanding how to be the periphery in all ways, geographically, politically, economically, and how the periphery can constitute new assumptions to assess, examine the sociological, and therefore how to build that sociological theory. I don't know if you feel it's clear enough.
Yeah, it's clear. So now my final question. So you have written extensively in the form of articles and books, and they are widely read and cited. And you have edited several volumes and were a series editor for many volumes.
Yeah.
Based on your long research journey, what advice would you like to give the young writers?
Well, I think that I think it's very important to have a critical perspective to be able to do sociology. I think it's important that we understand what is sociology in in its radical critical perspective, I see sociology not as a way to study inequalities, exclusions, and injustices. And I see sociology as a way um, to explore and unravel the processes, um, the cultures, the ideologies that organize these inequalities, exclusions, and injustices. And it is very important to ask the question methodologically how to ensure that our way of thinking does not become ideological, even though we start it from a critical perspective. So, sociology brings together not only the theoretical um, frameworks to understand the structures that organize these inequalities and exclusions and injustices, but it also asks questions about its own heritage and legacy, because it is so closely oriented to everyday life of people, and it is looped into a policy study or a public sociology, so that ultimately it becomes ideological also. So consequently, sociology, I think, works at two levels, not only at the theoretical level to understand what is this society, but it also works to unravel the power knowledge nexus that itself is caught into. And I think I find this the fascinating part of being a sociologist. And I would urge um, um, others to also think about these two levels of exercise that doing sociology challenges us to. And I feel um, that if we do the two and we walk the two pathways together, it becomes, uh, I think that sociology in India would be able to make a global mark. Earlier, you asked the question, um, why is why are Indians not recognized as global theorists? And I think they can be recognized as global theorists if they follow the twin paths of designing theories, but also critically looking at them to ensure that they cannot become ideological and political. And thereby to refashion all the time the assumptions that organize knowledge, because as soon as social change takes place, and we analyze that social change, it becomes part of a project of the state also. So we have to constantly take the location of the periphery to be able to um, critically unravel this power knowledge nexus. And I think sociology, among all the social sciences, only have the capacity to do it because it is rooted in the sociology of knowledge. My work I see as sociology of epistemology, and what methods to use, why to use it, how to unravel its ideological um, moorings to be able to continuously rethink critically of the way the structures and power are reproducing themselves. So sociology has the wherewithal, um, because of its moorings in sociology of knowledge, and sociology of sociology. And I think it's very important that if the next generation and new students grasp this resource of sociology, then it's possible not only for Indians to contribute to global social theory, but actually put forward alternate propositions, perspectives, and understand and make major contributions. So I see sociology has a future, but I also know that today's institutional collapse makes it very difficult for this kind of investment to be made by individuals, by departments, by universities, by research institutes. So therefore, we are in a very paradoxical situation where the institutional support is not there. And scholarship has to work without it sometimes, with it in different ways, and sometimes find individual commitment and passion without any support, even symbolic support. So this is a social capital of sociology, and I think and it is also a symbolic capital, and I think that has to be promoted. How it can be done, how to go forward, I have very little idea, but I can just say from my own experience that I have found support myself as I've grown as from a young adult to the present moment, from informal networks, from mentors who have not been my teachers, like Jan Breman, who has never been my teacher, but he engaged with me. Alice Thorner, who was not a teacher, but a colleague. And many such people who brought their own social capital and made me part of it. So informal networks and social networks are very important. And I always encourage my students to immerse themselves in these informal networks, to be able to find sustenance and confidence to do good practices within sociology. So I think beyond the formal institutionalized structures, we need these informal ones, which can help. And I think these are the best practices that we can use today. I hope this answers your question.
Okay, now we have come to an end of our conversation. Thank you, Professor Patel, for sparing your valuable time. It was indeed a pleasure having this insightful conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.